Happy December, happy holidays, everyone. I got a nice little festive Philadelphia behind me. Hopefully everybody is getting ready to move on to 2021 and put 2020 in the rear view. Happy to have Scarlett Sieber joining me today for a nice little pre-Christmas holiday chat, fireside chat. Welcome, Scarlett.
Thanks, Keith. I'm so happy to be here. We have had this conversation for a while now. And I just feel like as December is coming, people are winding down the year, getting ready for next year. You can't wind down the year without talking about talent and culture. So I'm so excited that we are taking all of these conversations that we've had offline and bringing them online, because I think a lot of people are going to feel the same frustrations and opportunities that we see there. But before we get started, let me just say real quickly who I am. And obviously, Keith, you are a great counterpart in this. And one of the reasons why you and I decided to do this is because, you know, Travillian and CCG are looking at this from very similar but different lenses, which I think is really powerful. So I'm Managing Director, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer here at CCG Catalyst Consulting. And we have clients, you know, that range financial services as the high level bucket. We do a lot of great work with clients from, you know, quite small to quite large, but the real focus for us and our vision and future for the future is really around bank fintech fusion. And you can't talk about those things without talent and culture. So, and of course, you play a big role with the talent piece, right, Keith?
Oh, yes. So here at Travillian, we pride ourselves on finding that innovative talent. So Travillian, it's interesting because we work with banks that are more traditional, but also we have clients who are very innovative. So that brings me back to culture. Culture has been a hot topic over the past, especially 6-7 months, as we have this COVID crisis and we're moving more into, you know, working from home and the digital transformation. In your opinion, Scarlett, and we've talked about this before, what role does culture play really in that digital transformation?
It plays everything. It is the key foundation and backbone to this digital transformation component. So I was on a panel earlier this week, and this was really about kind of incumbent institutions, traditional banks moving towards digital. And one of the audience asked a question actually, and they gave some information that asked a question, which was, there was a study done by PwC recently that this digital transformation effort was at a cost of $1.3 trillion. And they said that 800 billion of that money was a waste. So they wanted to know our response to that thought. And well, my first thing was, truthfully, that's not really, I think that's a bit vague to say 800 billion is a waste, because what are you identifying as a waste? There's a lot of learnings that came out of that, a lot of R&D. But one thing that I will say that truly, maybe there is a component of that, is when we're thinking and we're talking about digital transformation and digital in general, you continuously focus on the technology component of it and looking at the legacy systems and all those aspects. But I, having now done this myself many times, if you don't have the culture, then that stuff, even if you do get the right technology, is just, it's next to impossible. And we've seen here at CCG where we'll go in and we'll have conversations. People will reach out to me. They hear me speaking about these topics and say, hey, we want to do a digital strategy assessment or this, that, and the other. But what we end up finding, and not in every case, but certainly it's happened, is that you go in there and you see that while the vision, may or may not be on the right path for the future, one of the things that you start seeing is that the team, maybe there's a really visionary CEO, but maybe other people are not necessarily on board. That culture has not permeated, not even at the executive team level, on we truly believe in this focus on digital. So we can sit here and talk all day about accelerating digital transformation, but if you don't have that cultural component, we're kind of dead in the water.
Yeah, and that brings me back. We've gotten to know Patrick Sells at Quantic Bank, and he just took a new position with a hedge fund in New York, but we got to know him very well over the last 6-7 months, and he has a great metaphor for what you were just describing. He kind of says culture is the soil and technology are like the seeds, because he comes from Indiana. So you could throw all these fancy seeds at the soil and all this new technology and all glitzy. But if you don't have the culture to really innovate and use that, use that technology, it's just going to die on the vine. So what you're saying, I actually think the culture part is the hardest part
100%.
for the banking industry right now. It hasn't innovated as quickly as other industries. There's a lot of more traditional banks out there, great banks, community banks, but the shift is just happening so quickly right now. And I don't know if you feel it on your side, but we feel it on our side with the requests from clients, the webinars we're doing, the feedback we're getting from consultants such as yourself at CCG, that it is rapidly, COVID just expedited this digital transformation by 3 to 5 years. Yeah.
I certainly agree with that. And I think from the conversations that I and we had prior to COVID, if you speak with these executive teams, which is typically the level that we come in at, digital transformation, whatever, it's not usually always that word, but that pretty much encompasses all these things that we're talking about, will be on their list of priorities, but it was usually towards the bottom of the list. And how go, you don't necessarily get to all of them. Whereas, COVID definitely accelerated that, where it's now top, 3, maybe max 5. So I've certainly seen that component, and it's just, culture is really hard to get right. The longer the institution has been around, in some cases, the more embedded that legacy or traditional culture is. So to try to change that, it does not happen overnight, and it's something that takes a lot of effort and intention from the executive team and then all the way down.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So how does talent, how does that component really fit into what you were just describing when you speak with your clients?
It's everything, right? So your culture is your people. It's the way that you do things. It's the way that you operate, especially for these institutions, small and large. You may have that right vision, that right mission from the executive team even, but if you're not articulating the why behind it and how it's going to impact the individuals in your organization, you're going to be met with a lot of resistance. And that's a key component, and it gets really, really tricky to do that right, because people are afraid. Now let's talk about COVID. Even before COVID, technology can be very intimidating, and they may think, well, why am I going to be so open and forward and excited about this when this could take my job or my team's job? So it's really about, for me, the talent component is about empowering your team to be successful. And really, one of the things that we talk about, and our CEO, Paul, talks about all the time, is identifying what you as an institution, what makes you unique, what makes you special. And it's not as simple as, oh, we're a customer relationship focused bank. I mean, I think a lot of people say that. But what is it really that makes you unique? Look for those key components in the team that you have. You use those foundational aspects of that unique sauce, and how do you operate? How do you work best together? What type of profiles of people, make sense for you? And that's how you think about everything moving forward. And those are the people who are going to be on board and supportive of this overall cultural shift, which is towards digital transformation.
No, I couldn't agree more. Again, it's at the forefront of everything. And it can be tough. It can be daunting. And the easiest thing to say, or from my opinion, the worst thing you can say, is this is how we've always done it. And you hear that a lot. And that's, to me, this makes me cringe because there are a lot of innovative banks out there, a ton of fintech, as you know, innovating. You have big tech creeping into the industry, Goldman Sachs, Marcus, Google partnering with banks. So every day they're looking to provide better services and technology and that relationship. So the banks really have to innovate, or I say this a lot, it's going to be very similar to how retail was 15, 20 years ago, how Amazon changed everything. That's how I feel, digital banking and fintech relationships are changing the industry so quickly.
Yeah, I think you're right. And hit on a few key components there. So I think one of the first ones is around, so you mentioned fintech, because when we're talking a lot about culture, we keep referring to the banks, but the same is true for fintech. So one of the things you start seeing is that when you're a young, I'm talking about in terms of the life cycle of your company. When you're a young company, you've got a lot to focus on: product market fit, go to market strategy, all these other things that my opinion is sometimes they overlook that cultural component, which, by the way, is equally, if not more so, crucial for them, because people are joining them at a much more of a risk, because they're just getting started. So you really have to buy into that vision. You really have to believe into this opportunity. But if that cultural component is not set, like, that's where fintechs have the opportunity, because they get to build this from the ground up. They don't have this legacy behind them. They get to start from scratch. But if they don't do that on day one, maybe it doesn't have to be day one, but it should be day one, in my opinion. If they wait until too long, that's when you see these companies who have hyper growth, and then they're trying to figure out culture when they're 200 people and they have got into some trouble, and you've seen some of the press headlines. But on the talent thing, Keith, you were on the front lines. You spend so much time with your clients talking about this. So I would love to hear from you, because you have so many, unique perspectives and thoughts on this. What are some of the biggest challenges right now that your clients, or you're seeing as the industry from banks and community banks, really, in terms of talent? Where is the obstacle?
Well, beyond kind of the culture aspect, succession planning, Scarlett, is a huge issue right now for a lot of smaller community banks, very traditional community banks. A lot of them, I don't want to say all, don't have a real succession plan in place. And succession planning is not just an Excel spreadsheet saying, Bob will be the CEO in 5 years. As you know, it's a process that you have to get this person ready to be CEO, but even down to, other very niche roles. If the person who's running the ALM modeling, or, chief risk, decides to leave or retire or wins the lottery, I always say, like, win the lottery and just walks out, who is there? I mean, it's a huge risk. Who is there to, pick up the slack? But especially at the CEO level, because right now, banks and boards have to decide, is the CEO who took us from point A to point B over the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, some of them 40 years, the right person in place to take us from 2021 to 2025 and beyond. Because nothing against the CEO, he could have been great in building the relationships and getting that bank to where it is right now. Now, with this changing landscape and changing culture, is that the right person? And that's a tough discussion to have. Especially a lot of these bank boards and CEOs are very close, community knit. Are you going to be able to look in the mirror and say, wow, I'm just not, the person to take us to that next level, or beyond what we're doing right now? But you're already seeing it, Scarlett. We have, S&P Global Market Intelligence. We get alerts on all the retirings and firings and hirings. And just within the last 4 or 5 days, I've seen an uptick in alerts, people retiring next year. And my colleagues and I have been talking about this a lot. I think COVID gave people that time and that perspective to say, look, I'm done. I don't want to deal with this. I want to spend more time with my family. I was going to ride this out for a few more years, but now with the uncertainty next year and everything that's happened in 2020, I think you're going to see a large amount of retirements at the C level within the next 6 to 12 months. And who is going to move in there after that? Who is that leader to come in and take that bank to the next level? Or is the bank just preparing itself for sale? Which we don't want that to happen. We love community banks. They're the lifeblood of the American small business economy. Some of these banks have been around for 200 years. We don't want them to just sell to a larger bank. I mean, I tell my clients and my candidates all the time, my greatest fear is just 50 mega banks in 20 years. That's not good for anybody. So it's going to be tough, though, if you don't have that leader or those leaders who are going to move into those seats for the next year to 3 years. And a lot of banks just don't have that.
Yeah, you said so many things that resonated with me and the way that I and we at CCG think about things too. I certainly think that we've seen similar trends that you've mentioned, and part of that too is and that challenge of secession is not, again, not just on the bank side, it's on the fintech
Mm-hmm.
side, right? So that's actually a very common thing in tech companies. The original founder, that visionary to build it out, get things going, is the right person to a certain extent, but then when they get to a certain level of scale or scope or whatever, it's not uncommon for that person to be replaced. So that's a much more, common practice on the fintech side, but it is a struggle on the banking side. And thinking about that proactively as opposed to reactively is certainly important. And how are you identifying? What are you looking at? What are you thinking about when you want that next leader or that next group of leaders to take your
Mm-hmm.
institution to the next level? So that makes a lot of sense. So from that, because we're thinking about taking to the next level, during your conversation with your clients or what you've been seeing in the industry, how are they thinking about attracting talent now? Is it easier or harder post COVID? And what type
Ooh,
of talent are they looking for?
yeah, it's tough. Community banking is, it's a tough industry to recruit. And from my personal background, when I was in college, I don't remember community banks being on the top of the list of where my friends and I were looking, as Wall Street or Silicon Valley, or now it's fintechs. However, and we always say this to the candidates, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, community banking, there's so many opportunities to become a young innovator, C-suite executive. I mean, we see people in their late 20s in the C-suite in community banking, early 40s for larger community banks, regional banks, which is literally impossible if you go to JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America. And if you go to one of these innovative banks I've been speaking with, and there's going to be more coming down the road, you get to work on some really exciting stuff. Partnering with fintechs, looking at data analytics. AI is coming quickly. It's really a fun industry right now when you think about it. There's so much happening with these fintech relationships that it's exciting. It's not community banking as it used to be. And nothing against that at all. But if you're coming into this tech culture and you went to school for, MIT or whatever, you can do some really interesting things at a community bank and be at a C-level position very quickly. However, marketing that and then getting that to the candidates or to universities or business schools is tough. And they're starting to make some headway. There's a digital banking school that was just started up in Wisconsin by, I forget his name, but I think it's Eric Cook, but I'll go back and check that. But they're starting to make headway. And now with this post-COVID, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for talent. But you also have to have that core banking talent too. It's a tough industry to just come into from the outside and just hit the ground running day one. It's not like going from one tech company to another tech company. You have to understand regulations, compliance, how you work with auditors, how you work with the FDIC. It's very tough. So having that core kind of banking background along with some of the tech knowledge is something that we pride ourselves here at Travillian on finding and locating. But it's tough to find because it's either one or the other. There's not a lot of people, and you might be seeing this too, that have both that core banking background, understand it, and also have that innovative kind of digital culture also in their background.
No, you're 100% right, and I smiled many times throughout that because I rarely give this stat up, but I will because it's relevant to what you said. I was a CIO of a public bank when I was in my 20s.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
So I'm a perfect example of what you said, although I don't necessarily share that often, but I think in this case it would make sense because it provides context to what you're talking about. And the fact that, before then I was at BBVA and they hired me with zero banking background. But what you said at the end is the really crucial part, right? Which is having those type of leaders who see and are excited by people who think differently. Because it's not, we can talk about D&I, and that is something that's obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but is definitely very important to me. But when I'm talking about the thinking differently piece, that's a whole other world. Because if you've been in banking for a long time, you are an expert. You understand all of those areas: risk, compliance, legal, you name it. But you've been surrounded by, like, we all as humans end up kind of copying what we see around us and in our little silos. So if you're bringing someone from outside the industry, the way that they think about things is going to be very different. They're going to challenge you in new ways, and you're going to challenge them. So the key thing that I think that you were alluding to is really this idea of balance. Like, you definitely need those people, and it doesn't just have to be in the same person, but in the same leadership team, the people who are thinking differently, who are challenging the status quo, the people who are, innovators, whatever the word is. I mean, it's a buzzword, but it's really trying to articulate people who, challenge things, are always looking for something new and thinking differently. And then the people who are maybe, the more risk averse and who are true experts, and they should balance each other out. And so that's a really key component there. And for those institutions who, and like you said, there are a lot of opportunities at these smaller institutions, and it's a nice way to go in and not deal with some of there's always bureaucracy when we're talking about corporate life, but not to the same level. And you actually have the ability to get things done. You mentioned, a connection of yours and with Patrick Sells, right? Like, he was able to accomplish things to become that digital banker of the year, an American banker, because his leadership team empowered him to do so. And his colleagues were supportive of that.
And it's funny, Patrick said he came in from outside of banking completely, and he had to sit with Steve Schnall, the CEO, basically at his desk for like a year to learn banking. Because it really is impossible to just come in and say, okay, let's do this, and grand plans. And then you have the regulators, chief risk officer saying, no, we can't do that. So you're right, the balance is needed, and that diversity of thought on the board and on the in the C-suite is needed. You need that person who understands regulations and compliance backwards and forwards to kind of ground the innovator who has the big dreams. But you also need that too to challenge the compliance person on what they can do and how far they can go. And that's where the culture comes in, and it's not combative. It's just opinions on reality versus, pie in the sky. So yeah, it's definitely that I like to think of it as like a gray area of, banking and innovation coming together for a similar mission. It can't be, like you said, two people on each other's side trying to, it just won't work. It all has to be like one team.
Absolutely. By the way, one comment there. You mentioned boards, and I'm really happy that you did, because I forgot to mention that earlier. So when we were talking about succession planning, we were focusing on, the C-suite and some of the other players at that level. The board, oh my gosh, I would
start at the board.
Yeah,
start at the board level.
Some shake up there, because the board, we all know this at, the most obvious level, the board plays a huge role, but it really does as we think about this movement towards digital. So if you have all board members who have been there for, not necessarily in that position, but in the industry for 30, 40, 50 years, you want some of those. Oh my God, you need some of those, but in my opinion, they shouldn't be only those, because now no one is challenging the status quo there.
No, I completely agree. And if you go to the stats on boards, there's a big issue there. Aging, but diversity of thought and background. If you go to the innovative banks and Coastal Community Bank, who actually we partnered with recently on a placement, if you go to their board, oh man, they have people from Silicon Valley. They have an investment banker on there, completely diverse backgrounds. And you could tell at these board meetings, it's probably not just let's sit down, go over the numbers, and then head to dinner. There's probably an engaging conversation on where the bank should go and who they should partner with. And you can tell they're partnering with Google, and they just have that diversity of thought. But there's 5,200 banks out there. How many banks or bank boards have that type of diversity of thought and background? A lot of them are just local business people, which is fine. Like you said, you need balance. I think the key word is balance coming out of this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because in banking, the regulations aren't going to change. They might even get worse. Compliance is not going to change. It might even get harsher. There's going to be more compliance on, cryptocurrency and Bitcoins come down the road. You know it. So you need people who understand that backwards and frontwards. But you also need people challenging the status quo on how this business and this bank is going to survive and thrive in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Can completely agree with you.
And what do you think, speaking with your clients, especially at the CEO level, the most, crucial role of any organization, what things should they be looking for? Executive talent, focused on the digital side.
So it's a good question. It certainly applies to some conversations with our clients, but more even broadly across the industry. I think that, we like to categorize our clients in a few buckets because it helps us to better serve them where they are and meet their needs where they are. So if you look at some of the more traditional players, even if they say, we want to be, first of all, we have to help them kind of baby step them to make sure that they know where they are on that journey, because I think maybe one or two people have this idea of who they are. But then once you actually kind of get down into the nitty-gritties of the business and even the strategy, they're maybe a bit further behind than they expected. Mm-hmm. or they want to be doing these great big things, but you actually go look at their client base and it's like, but your client base is growing and they don't give a crap about this stuff. So maybe, really focus on where you are the most. So with that, I would say the key things are, if you are one of those more traditional players, then and that is your culture, back to what we were talking about earlier, you need to find talent that fits into that wrapper, mm-hmm. right? If you are a progressor and maybe you're somewhere in between, but you want to move to a progressor, you need to have that talent who is thinking about things differently.